he makes films that operate more like pieces of music than conventional films. And I think that that's why people who love music like me can relate to them more easily than say, like a traditional narrative like that. Honestly, ironically, it takes me more work to appreciate something that's more traditional than this, because his work, follows the same peaks and valleys as a musical score for me, and kind of relies on emotion and the way that it feels over telling a linear story. Hello, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I took a week here after David Lynch's passing and rewatched all of his films. And as I stated before, he's an artist who means a lot to me. And I would go so far to say that not only is he my favorite filmmaker, but he's just my favorite artist, period, because of the lessons that you can learn by studying him. He's an advocate, or he was an advocate of meditation and its use in the creative process. And that's something that in the days since he's passed away, I've gotten back into. I've gotten back into daily meditation. And in many cases, I practiced while watching these films, which I think is kind of the perfect way to experience them, because they exist on some sort of subconscious dream state level. But it got me to thinking about how the music and sound design in his films is about 50% of the experience for me, in a lot of ways. And this kind of idea started forming in my mind to talk about my favorite musical moments in each one of the feature films. Now, this will, of course, exclude Twin Peaks, although I will be talking about Fire Walk with Me, the Twin Peaks film. And the reason for this is that there's like 30 episodes of Twin Peaks, the original series, and I think there's 18 episodes of The Return. And that's just a lot of hours to go through. And I kind of felt like that could be a video of its own, depending on how well this video is received. I might look at Twin Peaks as a whole and just talk about some of my favorite musical moments there. But for now, we're just going to look at the 10 feature films in sequential order. And I wanted to clarify that I will not be talking about the soundtracks. He was a painter first, and he wanted to create paintings that moved and had sound. So kind of the point of this video is to talk about the moments when I think that the images and the sounds meet together in a very stirring way. So, obviously to talk about every single musical moment in a David Lynch film, I would be here until next Tuesday, and I have stuff to do. So I don't necessarily want to talk about every single one. But I thought that I would just sort of talk about each film in a general sense, and then point to one specific moment that resonates with me for a specific reason. So we're going to start with Eraserhead in 1977. Now, this is probably my favorite film of his for a lot of reasons. It may not be his best film, but it's the one that I associate most. Like if you say David Lynch, I immediately go to Eraserhead, because this film had an enormous impact on me when I first saw it a few years ago. And it kind of reshaped the way that I look at the world. And it also kickstarted my interest in cinema as a wider art form. This is a unique film. Of course, it was a student film that he worked on with his friends over the course of about 5 years. And as such, it doesn't have a soundtrack in the conventional sense, but he and Alan Splett, the film's sound designer, spent a year of those 5 just developing the soundtrack alone, the soundscape. And that's what it is. It's like an industrial soundscape with buzzes and hums and little moments of tension and, industrial noise. And that in itself has a musical quality to it. The whole film, you can kind of close your eyes and sort of imagine what's going on. And that soundscape in and of itself is very musical and very evocative, even divorced from the images. Now, there is, of course, the Fats Waller piece that you hear a few times throughout the film, including during the end credits. But the song which stands out to me because it is the only, really original song in the piece is, of course, In Heaven, Everything is Fine, also known as the Lady in the Radiator song. And this comes at a really pivotal moment in the film where he's seeking warmth and comfort and a release from this nightmare world that he finds himself in. The main character, Henry Spencer, of course, is stuck with this hideously deformed baby who just seems to own his life. His wife has left him. I mean, it's even implied that their relationship was falling apart before the baby came. And there's kind of this moment where she appears to him as sort of a guardian angel figure from out of the radiator, and she sings this song to him, In Heaven, Everything is Fine. And when David Lynch passed, this is the first scene that popped in my head and the first song that I thought of from all of his films. And its ethereal, haunting quality that also, as I said, provides a sense of relief from all of the tension and weirdness that has gone on for the last hour or so of the film. And, this is one of my favorite musical moments in any film. The song is very simplistic. It almost has like a Daniel Johnston quality to it, although I don't know if Daniel Johnston was even active yet in 77. I think he was still a few years off. And the lyrics themselves were written by David Lynch, music by Peter Ivers. And I think it kind of sets the tone for that ethereal style of music that David Lynch would later develop, say with Angelo Badalamenti and Julie Cruz in the Twin Peaks era in the early 90s. And that whole kind of ethereal genre is something that a lot of people have imitated. So this is the start of all that. It's a start of a lot of things. And it's far and away my favorite musical moment of Eraserhead. So moving on to David Lynch's second feature film, The Elephant Man in 1980. This was the first film that he made that he didn't write, although I believe he did rework the script quite a bit from where it was given to him. The famous story is that his producer handed him 5 scripts and said, "Hey, which one of these are you interested in?" And David Lynch saw the title, The Elephant Man, and that's all it took. He just knew he was right for that based on the title alone and his intuition. And that says a lot about who he is as an artist, because I feel like a lot of David Lynch's works follow his intuition. And the further you get along, like especially like Inland Empire, he's kind of riding on intuition alone. So, I love this film. It's one of my absolute favorite films. It's about a man who has a severe deformity, where his skull itself is popping out and all these weird, David Lynch described it almost like a mountain. Like he looks like something carved out of rock. And it deals with the way that society treats him, the attitudes toward him for simply being different. And, he's found working as a circus performer, and he's been badly beaten and abused. And Dr. Treves, played by Anthony Hopkins, sort of rescues him and takes him in. And then you deal with the other side of that. Yes, John Merrick, performed brilliantly by John Hurt. Yes, John Merrick is accepted by proper society, but are they in fact putting him on display all over again? for their own gain. So the question of exploitation runs throughout David Lynch's Elephant Man. And it's a beautiful film, and some people say it's his best work ever. And I don't know how I feel about that. To me, it's like all of his works are great, and they're so different in approach that it's hard for me to pinpoint, like, say, that is the best one. But objectively speaking, it may be his best work. I'm kind of like the enjoy it all sort of person. But talking about music, this is the first film of Lynch's that has what I would consider a very traditional sounding score, in the sense that it's orchestral, and the style of music is consistent throughout the film. Straight Story is also kind of like that, although it's not orchestral music. You'll find, further along in the 80s and 90s that the soundtracks can be pretty all over the place in a beautiful way, but The Elephant Man sounds consistent in terms of soundtrack from beginning to end. And the score was by John Morris, whom I'm not familiar with outside of this film, but it has a very, to my ears, silent era sound to it. It sounds very old-fashioned. And there's a little bit of that element of the circus music in there, as well as there's also an element of magic and mystery to it, which in many ways makes it the perfect score for a David Lynch film. Now, there's a couple of musical moments that really stand out to me. There's the moment where Anthony Hopkins' character first discovers and sees John Merrick, and you hear the score swell up, the camera pushes in, and Anthony Hopkins produces a single tear down his cheek, and it's possibly the most beautiful moment in the entire film, and that's saying something. But that's one that stands out. There's also a scene where John Merrick is attacked in his home, and the score becomes almost aleatoric in a way. Like it's very discordant, and it kind of sounds like a broken down circus calliope type of music. That obviously it sort of blossoms into the main theme. It played in it almost sounds like Danny Elfman before Danny Elfman, which makes me wonder if The Elephant Man was an influence on Tim Burton and Danny Elfman's work, especially something like Edward Scissorhands. But getting back to the music in this film, that's another moment that I really like. There's also the moment where we follow John Merrick in the train station, where he has been discovered by a young child because he's wearing the hood, and somebody in the train station pulls the hood off. There's mass hysteria. They chase him into the bathroom stalls, where he famously declares, "I am not an animal. I am a human being." And the score really goes a long way toward punctuating that sense of anxiety. And it kind of reaches a pitch and stops right before that line. And I feel like that line wouldn't carry, quite as much emotional weight without that buildup that the score provides. There's also a moment, it's really not that long after, like maybe 10 minutes later in the film, where John Merrick is watching a performance, a stage play, and he's, you see like a montage of all the things that are happening on stage. And you see there's a moment where like the camera zooms in and there's an image of an ogre being kept in a jail cell. And, later on, like the next scene, Merrick says something like, "I didn't think that ogre was ever going to escape the dungeon." And that he is seeing himself in that ogre character in the stage play, the same way that many of us, and maybe David Lynch himself, saw a bit of himself in John Merrick. And, during the scene, there's a very, very heightened music. And it's one of the rare moments in the film where John Merrick seems to be really enjoying himself, getting lost in the fantasy. And it's easy to kind of draw parallels to, oh, he's watching a stage play, we're watching a film. However, the absolute most iconic, drop dead gorgeous moment, heartbreaking moment in this film is the final scene of the film. And that is where he looks at the little craft that he's been working on, which again makes me think of David Lynch, the painter, and woodworker, and constantly working with his hands. And he looks up at the picture on the wall of the young girl laying down in bed, and it's almost like a flash forward to me of Laura Palmer looking at her guardian angels in the picture on the wall during some of Fire Walk With Me scenes. And you hear Adagio for strings by Samuel Barber being played underneath while he's pulling the pillows off the bed, because John Merrick says that he just wants to be able to sleep properly. Obviously, with his head being so large, if he lays down on his back, he'll suffocate himself. But at this point in the film, we know that he's going to die soon anyway. We don't really know why, although, it's probably a result of his condition combined with the abuse that he suffered. And he kind of chooses to go out in a way that makes him happy. That's something that he's always wanted. And you hear those strings swell up from the Samuel Barber piece as Merrick's mother appears in space saying, "Nothing will ever die." And it's a moment, again, like I talked about the ending of Eraserhead having greater weight now that David Lynch is gone. And I feel like this is another moment that has a lot more substance to it now, even than it used to. It's kind of hard to move me to tears, but that's the first time I've seen that, and I was actually moved to tears. And I've watched the film several times, but it has a little bit different context now. So that's an easy one for me to kind of point to as being the best scene in The Elephant Man, where the music and the images and the themes of the film all come together in a beautiful way. I think that the term that David Lynch would use is eye of the duck. And this is something to do with the duck's eye being in perfect proportion to the rest of its body. And if you remove that eye, you have no more duck. It doesn't, you wouldn't register the image of the duck without the eye. And I feel like this is a perfect example of that sort of scene. And, actually, I think that perhaps all of the scenes that we were talking today, or at least most of them, might be considered eye of the duck scenes. So on to the next film, which is Dune, David Lynch's troubled adaptation of the Frank Herbert science fiction classic. And, this is not my favorite David Lynch film. In fact, if I were to do a ranking, I think that this one would be number 2 and all the other ones would be number 1. That's sort of how I feel about it. But I still really like this film a lot. And you can see that he was getting at something here that obviously got corrupted and taken from him. And especially in the latter half of the film, where it just feels like a highlight reel, and things are kind of losing their resonance and their meaning. And now I've seen the Spice Diver edit, which is a 3-hour long edit of David Lynch's Dune, with a lot of the deleted scenes put back in. And obviously this is not David Lynch's work. You could argue it's a desecration of the work, a further desecration, but I think that it at least is a proof of concept for what Dune could have been. And it's much more logical and in many ways enjoyable way to watch the film. But talking about music, I think that this might be the first David Lynch film where the soundtrack album is as popular and beloved as the film, if not more so. And we see this with later films too, like Lost Highway, which is one that I value quite a lot, but some people don't. But the music by Toto is kind of groundbreaking because I don't think a rock band had done a score like that. Maybe Flash Gordon would count from Queen, but I think that their soundtrack was more like song based, whereas this one has Toto experimenting with an orchestral score with rock instruments kind of reinforcing it. So it has a very different flavor. And I love their score, by the way, especially toward the end, the very epic battle scenes where you start hearing the guitars coming in, and it's a very beautiful, memorable score. And, in many ways, the antithesis of Hans Zimmer's score for the new Dune, the Denis Villeneuve Dune. And, I think in many ways I prefer Toto's score to the Hans Zimmer scores for the new films. That being said, I am going to irritate Toto fans and perhaps Toto themselves, although I doubt they'll watch, because I know that they had a sense of competition with Brian Eno, which makes a lot of sense because Brian Eno is amazing. But my favorite musical moment in Dune is actually the scene where they first leave planet Caladan and head for Arrakis. And one thing that David Lynch's Dune does a lot better for me is communicating the more esoteric, mystical, spiritual ideas of Herbert's text, whereas obviously Denis Villeneuve's version is more centered on action and the war part of it, the conflict part, which I think is fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. In fact, I would say that the battle scenes are the weakest part of David Lynch's Dune. So they kind of balance each other out in a little way. But I wanted to point to two sequences in particular that are back to back, and the one where they're traveling to the one where they're traveling to Arrakis, and you see the Guild Navigator, which is a giant space slug that kind of looks like the Eraserhead baby on steroids, and he kind of spits this beam of light out that somehow allows our heroes to fold space. So instead of traveling at like light speed, they take space like a piece of paper and fold it together so you can travel to one side or the other. And this concept is communicated as much by the visuals as it is by Brian Eno's prophecy theme, which I think is the best moment in either of the Dune adaptations that I've seen. It's my favorite moment in either one of them, and I could just watch it again and again on its own, and it kind of puts the hair up on the back of my neck when I watch it. Even though I don't fully understand what's going on, it does a great job of communicating, like I said, those more esoteric ideas. There's also a sequence which I think occurs right before that, that is another one of my favorite moments, and that's when we are first introduced to the Harkonnens, who are the enemies, the bad guys of the piece, and we hear very Eraserhead style noises and industrial kind of murmuring happening as Brad Dourif's character is landing on the planet. And then that whole moment, that whole scene where they go into the Baron's chambers, and it's some of the creepiest, most disturbing stuff I've certainly seen in a science fiction film, is punctuated by Alan Splett's fantastic sound design. And a lot of those sounds sound identical to the ones used in Eraserhead. So it has that feel. But those two sequences back to back for me are better than anything in the current iterations of Dune, which I should, again, reiterate that I really do like what Denis Villeneuve has done. And I like that it's his own thing and it's a fresh take. But what I miss is those Lynchian moments that remind me of my favorite filmmaker and why he's my favorite filmmaker. So moving on, we are now at 1986's Blue Velvet. This was the film that put David Lynch back on the map. After The Elephant Man, I think he pretty much could do whatever he wanted to because it was a major success. And he was getting offers to direct like Return of the Jedi, which I think would have been awful for him. If Dune was a heartbreak for him, I think that working with George Lucas would be 10 times worse. By the way, I love George Lucas. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm a prequel apologist. I like the special editions, all that stuff. It's just that George Lucas is a man who has a very specific vision, and he needs to work with people who are in service of that vision. David Lynch is too independent of an artist. He's too similar in a lot of ways to me in mindset to George Lucas. And I think they would be oil and water together, as kind of evidenced by some of the comments that Lynch has said about meeting George. I don't think it would have worked. So, he does Dune. Dune is taken away from him, and about 45 minutes is cut from it, which basically turns the thing into a incoherent mess. Strong start, but kind of weak ending. And he, in 1985-86, he fights to have complete control, to have final cut over Blue Velvet. And what results is one of the quintessential David Lynch films, and it put him back on the map as a creative. It's not like it was a massive success, and the film was highly controversial at the time. But it's really the first time that Lynch dealt with the idea of a picturesque, nostalgic America of the 50s, and then he looked underneath the fingernails and found the dirt. He looked underneath the beautiful white picket fences and flowers to the insects crawling in the dirt underneath. And this whole idea of the ugly underneath, to steal a phrase from XTC, that band, is something that you see recurring in other works like Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive. So, and to some extent, I think Inland Empire too. But talking about favorite musical moments, there are so many in this film. Like, I could probably make a video on Blue Velvet and just talk about the use of music and how brilliant it is. But obviously the first one I think of is Bobby Vinton's song, that is the title of the film, Blue Velvet. And this is the song that plays over as we're seeing those opening images of idealistic America. And then there's also the use of, this is the first time that Angelo Badalamenti appears, and we get his kind of jazzy soundtrack music that would be used to great effect in Twin Peaks. We hear that for the first time here. We have Isabella Rossellini's very broken rendition of the Bobby Vinton song Blue Velvet, which I think further contrasts the difference between the bright and sunny version and the more fractured version that we get from her. The moment that sticks out in my mind as being the most memorable from this film is Roy Orbison's In Dreams. And this is used in a scene where Kyle MacLachlan's character is captured by Frank Booth, and they go to this kind of shady bar that is being, I don't know if he owns it, but it seems like it's being occupied by Dean Stockwell's gang, who are friends of Frank's, and Dean Stockwell is kind of the only person in this film who comes off as even more threatening than Frank Booth, because Frank Booth respects him and kind of fears him at the same time, and maybe a little bit in love with him. Like there's a little bit of that too. But just out of nowhere, he flicks on this trouble light and pretends like it's a microphone, and he mimes to Roy Orbison's In Dreams. And I feel like In Dreams, if you pay attention to those lyrics, it almost sums up David Lynch's ethos. The idea that we live inside of a dream. And it's one of the songs that was written in the 50s, I think, but it sounds like it could have been written for the film. and maybe could have been written for any David Lynch film. And just the fact that, you have Dean Stockwell in the white makeup, and he's kind of dressed in a certain way. I'm going to throw up an image here. The reflection of the trouble light off of his face, I think, kind of, it's a way of showing the decay to me of this town, because he almost looks corpse-like, and the shadows and stuff cast on his face sort of emphasize this. And it's an example, the first time of many, where David Lynch was able to cast somebody who looks the way that they looks like, they are singing the voice that comes out. It just seems like, in my mind, like I could very much imagine him singing and having Roy Orbison's voice. And it's such a creepy, bewildering moment that it's just kind of throws you off. But again, it's one of those scenes that, for me, is the most memorable scene of Blue Velvet. And I think that if you took that scene out, a lot of things would just kind of crumble and fall apart in it. It sort of just ties it together. So again, it's one of those Eye of the Duck type scenes. All right, so on to Wild at Heart, which was released in 1990, around the same time as Twin Peaks came out. Twin Peaks came out, was on the air in 1989. So this is a film that I associate a lot with that era of David Lynch, especially given that he reuses a lot of the same actors who had appeared in Twin Peaks and would later, they hadn't yet, but would later appear in Twin Peaks. And this came out at a period where, commercially speaking, David Lynch was on top of his game and could pretty much do anything. It was probably an even better time for him than post Elephant Man. So this film is another adaptation of an existing work. In this case, Barry Gifford's Wild at Heart book. This would be the first of a few times that David Lynch and Barry Gifford would work together. It tells the story of, it's a very complicated web, but Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern's characters, Sailor and Lula, respectively, are young folks in love, and they are kind of this pureness that exists in a world of hell. Everything around them seems to be threatening them in some way. Their very environment seems to be a threat to them in some way. And Lula's mom, played by Laura Dern's actual mother, is Diane Ladd, is trying to cover up a crime in which she had her husband killed, Lula's father. And Nicolas Cage's character was actually involved that night because he's taking on all of these shady side jobs. And so she's trying to have Nicolas Cage's character killed throughout the entire film. And he's just gradually picking up felonies as he goes along and getting more and more, unlawful. But yeah, it does kind of have this theme of innocence against the world. And I love that about it. That's the thing that draws me to it. Musically, this is one that is pretty all over the place. Opening with like, In the Mood. It opens with like Glenn Miller's In the Mood, which is really cool. And we're in part of South Carolina. And one of the recurring pieces of music, which ties the tapestry of this film together, is Slaughterhouse by a thrash metal band called Power Mad. And we first hear this when Lula's mother, Misfortune, has put a hitman on Sailor, and Nicolas Cage's character beats him to death. The violent punches seem to line up with the riff in Slaughterhouse, and that's a recurring motif that he'll kind of punch out of anger, and you'll hear that that riff come in. I love that. That's such a cool use of music. Like I wish more filmmakers did that sort of thing. But there's other sort of, instances. Like there's one scene pretty early on where Sailor and Lula go dancing, and they are dancing in the club to the Power Mad tune. And it's very, very kind of violent dancing. It's like kind of letting off all this steam and all this energy. And there's a man who approaches Lula and tries to pick her up or something. And you have this territorial, toxic masculinity performative thing that Nicolas Cage's character does. This is my girl, keep your hands off of her. And he threatens him, and he stops the band, and he asks them to play an Elvis song. There's this surreal dreamlike moment that the film slips into where Nicolas Cage sings the song "Love Me" by Elvis, and you hear the women screaming, sort of like the Beatles, and it's used as part of the soundtrack that just kind of crescendos up at different moments in the song. And this is one of those moments that I point to that makes me love David Lynch's style, because you just flip on a dime, and it seems like we've gone from something that's sort of realistic and we've slipped into a daydream. And there's another couple of moments, like one recurring motif I love is that when Harry Dean Stanton's character is trying to chase Sailor and Lula down and catch them before the hitmen do, every time you cut to him, it's Baby Please Don't Go by Them on the stereo. And I just kind of have to crank up the sound whenever that happens, because I think it's such a cool moment. But I think my favorite moment of the film is actually much deeper when we're talking about musical moments. And there is a moment where Sailor and Lula are screaming down the highway at high speeds, and Lula is trying to dial in something on the radio, and all she gets is just these terrible, horrific news stories, and she's disgusted. And she pulls off the side of the road, and she screams, "Give me some music on this radio." And so they turn on Power Mad again, and they're kind of dancing violently and punching the air and letting off all this steam and nervous energy. And there's a moment where they look at each other, and the orchestral score takes over, and there's this big romantic moment where they embrace and they're in love. And I've heard that some people, this is where they walked out of the film because it was just too much for them to go from these different extremes. But I always liked how David Lynch's films were more like life, because life isn't one tone. Life can change on a dime. One phone call can change everything. Like there's a scene in The Straight Story that's like that. And I have always felt in a weird way, despite their dreamlike qualities, there is a sense that David Lynch's films are like reality in a weird way. And this is one of those moments that kind of emphasizes that in such a wonderfully cinematic and beautiful way that feels real too. So after Wild at Heart, that of course was a film that was very successful for him. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes at the film festival in France. It was a controversial choice. Not everybody liked it. But this along with the success of Twin Peaks meant that David Lynch was riding high for a little while. It didn't last long though, because on Twin Peaks, the network ABC, in their infinite wisdom, chose to force David Lynch and Mark Frost's hand at revealing Laura Palmer's killer, which if you haven't seen the series, I'll try not to spoil it, although when we talk about Fire Walk With Me, it's going to be very hard. But suddenly he wasn't as popular as he was. And it was in the wake of this that he made Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which I think was highly misunderstood at the time and has rightfully gone on to become a classic. It's also one of those films that the soundtrack might be more famous than the movie. And maybe hands down might be my favorite David Lynch soundtrack, just because it covers so much ground, from kind of moody, soft jazz to experimental music. And there are times, there's music on this that I don't think even has a genre. It's just so cross-pollinated with other things that it's kind of hard to pinpoint it down. And again, there are multiple moments in this film that I absolutely love the music in. Obviously, if you don't know the film, Fire Walk With Me is a prequel to the Twin Peaks series, where we spend we are spending Laura's last few days with her, and we kind of see what leads up to her death and what's going on. And it's like The Elephant Man. It's a film with incredible pathos for its character, and you really feel for this girl. And well, anyway, there's a scene that I probably will not be able to describe to you without being demonetized. So look it up. But I'll just kind of give you a vague idea what's going on. So Laura and her best friend Donna meet at this shady bar, and it's suggested that they actually leave the state of Washington, that they're actually in Canada at this point. And they meet up with these guys who are looking for debauchery, basically, and they're led back to this club where all these drugs and sleazy things are going on. And you hear this music as they enter the back room of the club that it's kind of countrified in a way, but it's dark. And as it progresses, it gets more and more repetitive. Like there's like a cello underneath of it, and like this heavy electric guitar and kind of like jazz drumming. And it just kind of keeps repeating until it starts to disintegrate in on itself. Almost like something out of like a Kosmish group, like somebody like Can would do. And the track is called The Pink Room / Blue Frank. And this is one of those tracks that I could just listen to on its own without the images, but combined with the imagery, it does a really good job of portraying what it's like to disassociate from reality, to be just pulled apart from reality itself, particularly under the influence of a substance. And, there's that final shot where, you kind of pan over the burnt cigarettes on the ground, and you still hear that music fading out until it fades into the trees of Twin Peaks, Washington. And that's a moment that just, it never fails to impress me. It impressed me the first time I saw it, and it's still impressive to this day. And there's a lot going on in this scene. Like, obviously, Donna just wants to keep up with Laura and be a part of her life because she's her best friend. And Laura doesn't want Donna corrupted, and so she's trying to save her at the same time. And obviously, in the end, who needs saved is Laura herself. And so there's a lot of like human emotion going on underneath too, and it's very high stakes. Following the release of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, there was quite a lot of controversy surrounding David Lynch, and I think that a lot of people who liked him started to question it. And I think that a lot of this has to do with the fact that I think they wanted I think what they wanted was a continuation of the story, because at the end of the Twin Peaks series, and I mean, gosh, should I ruin it? I mean, the show's like 30 years old now. I guess if you don't want spoilers, skip ahead on the timestamp to the Lost Highway section. So at the end of Twin Peaks season 2, and that is your final warning, at the end of season 2 of Twin Peaks, Cooper character played by Kyle MacLachlan is apparently possessed by Bob, and the main antagonist, and the demonic spirit responsible for the death of Laura Palmer. So basically, our protagonist becomes our antagonist by the end of Twin Peaks, and for 25 years, that was the end of it. And I think when Fire Walk With Me came out, people wanted those answers. They wanted to know what happened next, and they didn't really care that much about Laura Palmer anymore. And I think that maybe that proves that Lynch and Frost were right, that the Laura Palmer mystery, I don't know if MacGuffin is the right word to say here, but it really wasn't that important. It was just it was there in the background, but really what Twin Peaks was about was the characters and their interactions, and it was kind of a study of human behavior in a way, as well as exploring some of those more esoteric ideas of good versus evil. But what Lynch wanted to do is he wanted to tell a story about Laura Palmer, the young woman. And, I love that. Like, I love that about the film. I love that it takes a character who was a corpse, and she was a photo that people cried over, and it gives you that context. Like, if you are a fan, and you haven't done this already, watch Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me and follow it up immediately with the Twin Peaks pilot as a double feature. And suddenly the outpouring of grief that happens is something that you resonate with, because you know this girl. She's flesh and blood to you. And I think that fleshing out Cheryl Lee's character is a huge bonus to the Fire Walk With Me film. And it's my favorite thing in the Twin Peaks canon. Like, if I just want a dose of Twin Peaks, but I don't want to commit to either one of the series, I just throw the film on, because it has that quirky sense of humor. It has the horror in spades. If I really wanted more of that, the missing pieces, the deleted scenes, have a lot more of those quirky townsfolk moments that people love the show for. But obviously, by the time we get to Lost Highway in 1997, David Lynch's career is kind of on a downturn. And I think that a lot of things that people liked about David Lynch's films were starting to be copied by others. And so maybe he was beginning to feel like people were stealing from him. I think that Lost Highway was a film that was in many ways a reaction to that, because it feels like he's angry. Like, especially the first hour or so just feels so angry. And it, of course, was influenced by the O.J. Simpson trials. And it features a jazz saxophonist who's apparently successful playing avant-garde jazz, which is incredible. He's kind of a John Zorn type, but he's filled with all of this rage and insecurity. And he's apparently tormented by this mystery man who claims to be inside his house. Now, you can take this in a couple of different ways, but I've always read that the mystery man was another iteration of Fred. That the scene where Bill Pullman's character goes into his bedroom and he sees something and reacts to it, and you hear like this low note on the soundtrack that just sounds like the bottom dropped out of your stomach. And the look on his face is like surprise, and then followed by, oh, I always knew. And I think that that the mystery man is a manifestation of himself, and is just another one of his doppelgangers, just like Pete is. So this, of course, is a film about a man who murders his wife and then forgets about it. He protects his psyche by forgetting about it. And he goes so far to protect his psyche that he turns into another person. A young man who's like in his early 20s, who's much more successful with women and in many ways, I think is an embodiment of who Fred wishes that he was. But he still runs into Patricia Arquette's character, and has some of the same problems with her as before, and at the end is kind of reborn or resurrected back into the Fred character, and takes revenge on some of his tormentors and the people that his wife is involved with, such as Mr. Eddie / Dick Laurent. But it's a very confusing film for people, but it's one of those movies that the more I watch it, the more I like it. It's kind of hard to pin down exactly what's going on, and it's very much abstract and open to interpretation. All things that I think are positives about the film. I like these things about the film. The soundtrack is, I think, one of the most legendary movie soundtracks ever, because it captures a lot of the zeitgeist of the 90s, with artists like Trent Reznor, David Bowie, Smashing Pumpkins, Marilyn Manson, Rammstein, and in fact, the Rammstein piece that is included on the soundtrack is used in a very similar way to the Power Mad song Slaughterhouse in Wild at Heart, which is interesting, especially since Barry Gifford assisted in writing this film. So they have a kind of like similar use of thrash metal or heavy metal to go along with the violent scenes in the film. There's also the use of a song by the Smashing Pumpkins that actually made me a huge fan of that band, called I. And the whole song doesn't really feature much in the film, but it's one of the best songs on the soundtrack. So that's one that I could point to as being a favorite. But I'm going to be, I'm going to let this one off a little easily, I think, for myself, and go ahead and claim that the main title credits are my favorite musical moment in the film. And there's a couple of other moments that come close for me, one of which I don't think I could describe, maybe more than one I don't think I could describe on YouTube, but I'm going to go ahead and pick the main credits theme, the main title theme, which features David Bowie's song I'm Deranged from the Outside album, composed by Bowie and again Brian Eno, coming back into the fold for the first time since Dune. And kind of like the song In Dreams by Roy Orbison, it kind of feels like I'm Deranged could have been written for Lost Highway. And you just listen to the lyrics and it almost sounds like David Bowie is describing Patricia Arquette's character, a blonde beyond. This music with the shot of the highway going by at high speeds sets the tone perfectly for what you're about to see. And I just love it. I absolutely love this film. I love the way that this song sets the mood for everything you're about to watch in the next 2.25 hours. So yeah, I may have, taken the easy way out here on Lost Highway by picking the main title theme, I'm Deranged, but I'm also being true to myself. And that is the song that I think of when I think of this. I also think of Marilyn Manson's rendition of I Put a Spell on You, which is used to very memorable effect in this film. But moving on, we are going to take a look at one of the stranger entries in the David Lynch catalog, simply because it is so simple and straightforward. It's just a simple story about good folks helping each other out. There's no antagonist, and that is The Strait Story. Now, this was a true story about Alvin Strait, a critically ill older man who didn't have access to a car or driver's license, and he wanted to go visit his brother who had just suffered a stroke. So he got on his riding mower and rode from Laurens, Iowa, to Mount Zion in Wisconsin. And it's a beautiful film, and there's a lot of terrific moments in it throughout. And much like The Elephant Man, I think that it is one of the most accessible films, and much like that film's score, it's also one of the more consistent ones in terms of mood. Most of the soundtrack kind of sits in the same place, of this kind of folksy acoustic guitars and fiddle. There's a little bit of keyboard stuff in the beginning in the main title theme that sounds like it's threatening to become Laura Palmer's theme from Twin Peaks. But I think that's actually appropriate for a film like this because it celebrates small town life and good, hardworking people much in the same way that Twin Peaks did. And maybe that's why this film resonates with people as much as it does. As for myself, it's not my favorite David Lynch work because to me, I think that David Lynch works are best when you have the two extremes. You have the beauty and you have the brutality because the beauty becomes more beautiful when you have moments of brutality, and the brutality becomes more brutal when you have moments of beauty. That release, that contrast is a huge part. And I also like David Lynch films best when, to borrow one of his phrases, when they have room to dream. And I don't necessarily like the idea of being told exactly what's happening and in a very literal way. I like films that require my participation and hold up over multiple viewings. And I'm not saying that Straight Story does not. I'm just saying that it's a relatively straightforward linear road movie that was shot in sequence, which is very strange. Films are almost never shot in sequence. And I think that might be why he called it his most experimental work, is because it was kind of like capturing a slice of life as it happened. And, I think it was the Mark Cousins interview where he talked about how, the opposites, like Blue Velvet is all about showing the bright sky and the white picket fence and then the dirt. It pans down and you see the dirt and the insects. Whereas a movie like this seems to start on the ground and face up in the sky, the infinite. And much like The Elephant Man, it's about this contrast of a very small thing, the micro level, and then the macro level, the context of the wider universe existing all around these people. And that's why both films, Elephant Man and Straight Story, have a lot of sequences where characters will be, kind of on the ground and they'll look up and see the stars. And so there's one moment in this film that stands out musically to me, and it's actually my favorite part of the movie. And it's a single shot, pretty much. I mean, there's a few extra little things thrown in there, some images of farming machines and such, but basically we start on the ground and we see the highway going by, much like the motif used in Lost Highway and Blue Velvet. And I think also Wild at Heart too, a little bit. But we see the highway go by, but it's going by at 5 miles an hour. It's just kind of barely cruising. And you see the camera pick up and pan over Alvin's tractor, and you see the cornfield, and it goes up into the sky, and you see that the lighting changes while we're up in the sky, meaning that time has passed. Like, for instance, like maybe we've gone from like early morning into like a late afternoon, and the camera then pans down and you see that he's barely moved just a couple of feet in all those hours. And it's like, it's that the tininess, the vastness of the universe, and then a joke. It opens with a joke and ends with a joke, and it shows all this amazing context in between. And the music that's underneath is, again, a very uncharacteristic Angelo Badalamenti piece, and it's called Lorenz Walking. I checked out the soundtrack, and it's so beautiful. It's like the soundtrack to this might be the rare case where I may actually like the soundtrack better than the movie in some ways. The soundtrack is just absolutely, it's mellowing. It's beautiful. It's relaxing to listen to. And I kind of like how it evokes movement and traveling. So this is a very good film. I understand why people love The Straight Story. It's just that it's not one of the most rewatchable ones for me, because I like the ones where I can kind of apply some of my own imagination to it to fill in the blanks. And that's why films like Lost Highway and Eraserhead and Mulholland Drive are the works of Lynch's that I return to the most. So in 2001, David Lynch released his final feature to be shot on film, and that was Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive started out as another pilot for ABC. Instead of the mystery being who killed Laura Palmer, it was going to be who is this mysterious woman, Rita, who is involved in a car accident and apparently suffers horrible amnesia. This being underpinned by the story of Naomi Watts' character, Betty, who comes to Los Angeles, comes to Hollywood to make it big in the motion picture industry. And I think that it was always going to be a critique of the evils of Hollywood, but you can kind of tell where the pilot ends and the R-rated movie begins, the stuff that was shot a year later, because we get even deeper and darker into the evils of Hollywood. And it makes for a really spectacular and memorable film, and one that's full of great musical moments. Perhaps, this one, again, and Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me have the best scores. You have the opening sequence with the jitterbug dance, that kind of Charles Mingus-y style jazz. It starts out sort of conventional and then begins to collapse in on itself, much like the Pink Room soundtrack does. But the main title theme, which honestly, again, makes me think of Danny Elfman's Batman theme a little bit. But that kind of spooky, mysterious Mulholland Drive theme is very memorable. And then you have the again, very aleatoric and very dissonant score that's played under the sequence at Winky's Diner, where the character goes out behind the diner and says that he's seen this face in a dream, and he hopes to never see it in real life. And oh, by the way, there it is. And he apparently dies of some sort of heart attack, or I don't know if he dies or what, but the point being that the music underneath heightens that feeling of anxiety and pulls off what many people think is the greatest jump scare in any film. And the importance of that jump scare just continues to play throughout the rest of the film, because every time you see that motif of the camera just slowly creeping around the corner, you think something's going to jump out at you. I don't think anything really does for the rest of the film, but it always leaves you on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen. And I like that as a device. And it also kind of, sets up the film as being a dream or nightmare experience. There's also the scene where we see Justin Theroux as the director, and you hear the song "I've Told Every Little Star." And that's a very memorable moment in kind of a in dreams sort of way, as you see these girls miming to this very 50s style song that still just kind of captures again that urban decay theme that shows up in Blue Velvet, and it gives that song an additional context, much in the same way that the Roy Orbison song was. But that's an excellent segue, because my favorite musical moment of this film, once again, features a famous Roy Orbison song. This time not performed by Roy Orbison, but by Rebecca Del Rio. And there is a sequence about 2/3 of the way through the film where Betty and Rita, Naomi Watts and Laura Harring's characters, wake up in the middle of the night, and Rita says that she wants to go to this club right now, she says. Even though it's 2:00 in the morning, she wants to go right now. And they hail a cab. They go out to this, really ethereal, dreamy theater somewhere in LA. And we see this performance playing out where the master of ceremonies, who's kind of a magician type, is telling us that we hear music, but it's a recording. We see a man playing the trumpet, and he puts the trumpet down, and we still hear the trumpet notes coming out. And following this, Rebecca Del Rio is announced as who she is. She's not playing a character, she's playing herself. And she comes out and she sings a Spanish language version of Crying, the Roy Orbison song. And the makeup that she's wearing looks like tears. And we see the way this affects Betty and Rita, who are sitting listening to it. And they're in tears too. And in the middle of singing this beautiful song, she collapses on stage, apparently dead. Or perhaps she just is unconscious, but I think it's implied that she's dead. But the song continues. And even though we know that this is sort of what's going to happen, we get so caught up in the music that it's still a surprise. And I always took this as a meta commentary on the way that Hollywood, and I guess the entertainment industry, the music industry at large, exploits people long after they're gone. And even though you're gone, you still have a million albums coming out every year. And, this is another one of those scenes that has more resonance to me now that David Lynch is gone. And I hope going forward, obviously we're going to see more David Lynch material come out because there's money to be made there. And I'm sure that it does support his children, which I'm in favor of. But I hope that it's not in an exploitative way. And I hope that his legacy is carried on in a way that he would have liked while he was still alive. Otherwise, that scene could take on an even further context for me that I hope it avoids. But I do love that sequence, and it's far and away, it's my favorite sequence in Mulholland Drive by far, and perfect use of music and imagery in a way that again, like I think David Lynch's works, he makes films that operate more like pieces of music than conventional films. And I think that that's why people who love music like me can relate to them more easily than say, like a traditional narrative. Like that, honestly, ironically, it takes me more work to appreciate something that's more traditional than this because his work, follows the same peaks and valleys as a musical score for me and kind of relies on emotion and the way that it feels over telling a linear story. That's a great segue to David Lynch's final feature film. And this one is different from any other of his films because it was shot on digital, and that is Inland Empire, a labyrinthian nightmare fuel 3-hour head trip of a movie that is definitely his most obscure, his least accessible, and again, oddly enough, has some of his most emotionally resonant moments for me, many of which involve music. And I actually hadn't seen this in a while, and of all the films of his, it's the one I've probably watched the least. And this last time when I watched it, it ironically was the one that fascinated me the most. And it kind of kept me thinking for the next couple days. And trying to explain this film in any way is very difficult. And as David Lynch has always said, trying to explain his works takes something away from them. It kind of hurts the magic of them a little bit. But Inland Empire is a film starring Laura Dern as a woman in trouble. And on the surface, she is a Norma Desmond from Sunset Boulevard style actress whose the height of her career is long gone, and she's trying to make a comeback. And she ends up starring in this film that's about infidelity, people cheating on each other in marriage. And the film is apparently cursed because it comes from a folk tale, and then they attempted to make a movie out of it years ago, and the stars were murdered, so it was never finished. And as the film progresses, Laura Dern starts to merge with her character in the film, all while we are shown scenes from Back in Time of the young woman who I guess is the originator of the curse. I don't think she's the actress who was in the original film. I think this is actually where the curse comes from. And this phantom character seems to be hypnotizing people and recreating the killing of his own wife, which is really insane. But the film was put together in kind of an improvisational way. Like David Lynch was writing a scene and shooting it on his little digital video camera, Sony whatever from 2006. And he didn't really know how it was going to all connect until later. He was just kind of riffing like a jazz musician. And obviously this produced a lot of excess material, and the deleted scenes are almost 90 minutes. They're like a feature film of their own. But we do get a number of really incredible musical moments in this craziness. I love the use of the song "The Locomotion" when the prostitutes that Laura Dern's character is hanging out with near the middle of the film just break out dancing into the locomotion for no reason. It's a moment that provides levity in a film that's very dark and kind of deliberately impenetrable. I also love the moment where she seemingly goes back in time and visits the cursed woman. She visits her location. We hear David Lynch's original song, "The Ghost of Love," and it almost sounds like the same style of music as the Pink Room song and Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. But that's a really great moment when she transports back in time, and she has her eyes covered, and she opens them up, and you see her fingers on screen, and you hear that music. I also love when she first lands on the streets of L.A., again with the Valley Girls, and you hear Beck's black tambourine and some Penderecki music, I think intertwined. And there's also some Penderecki music when she's killed in the murder scene that works really well. However, my favorite moment of the film, and it could be a spoiler if anything from this film could be considered a spoiler. I'm thinking that this is one of those films you could read everything there is to read about it and you still wouldn't be spoiled in the least. But the final scene is the end credit scene where Laura Dern's character. Now, I've read some interviews with David Lynch as well as some fan theories online, and it seems to be a film that's about karmic death and rebirth. And Laura Dern's character at the end finally reaches happiness. She reaches nirvana at the end of it. And that final scene, the end credits sequence, is kind of the manifestation of her happiness after 3 hours of terror and not quite knowing who she is. And but the thing that's cool about it is that there's a couple of references to other David Lynch works, like Laura Haring is there on the couch and she blows a kiss to Laura Dern's character, and it just kind of feels like the closest thing he's ever come to winking at the camera and saying, "Yeah, I know, I'm referencing myself." And then there's also a woodsman cutting a log that looks straight out of the Twin Peaks media, and so it kind of feels like it's not just a celebration of Laura Dern's character finally finding happiness, but also, and being released from the curse, but it's also a celebration of his films. And we see this dance sequence take place to Nina Simone's Sinner Man, and we have an actress kind of miming the part, and much like Dean Stockwell in Blue Velvet, she just has the perfect look. Like she looks like she has Nina Simone's voice while she's singing. She looks like she could be the original singer, and she's so well cast. And I just love the feeling of release that this scene provides after, just nightmare fuel for the last 3 hours. It's such a great way to end the film on a high note. And, a couple of David Lynch's films end on an unambiguously happy ending. A couple of them don't. But I kind of like this as a cap to his feature films, his filmography. Obviously, we have Twin Peaks Season 3 in 2017 to explore after this. But like I said earlier, that could be its own video, because every one of those episodes, those 18 episodes, has some use of music that I think is extraordinary. And there's several across the original Twin Peaks series as well. So if you did enjoy this video, be sure to like it. Leave a comment letting me know what are some of your favorite musical moments in David Lynch films. And if you would like to hear me talk about favorite musical moments in Twin Peaks, the best way to encourage me to do that is to subscribe to the channel, because I will see the analytics and see what topics are doing well, and it will have a bearing on what I decide to do next. But until then, it's been real fun. A fun experiment trying to talk about films and bridging the interest gap between music and movies. And if this does well, hopefully I'll be talking about more movies and more David Lynch movies in the near future. But until then, my name is Ian, and it's been real fun. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.